Okay, so have you ever heard of like an HOA banning somebody for, like laughing too loud at a barbecue?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it sounds crazy, right? But that's just one of the kind of outrageous rules that we're going to be looking at today in this deep dive.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you sent in this story about a judge who like took on his own HOA, and I have to say I was hooked from page one.
Well, what's really interesting here is how this story isn't just like some quirky legal battle, right?
Right.
It really gets into how like these power dynamics play out, in these like seemingly idyllic planned communities.
Yeah, totally.
And for you, as someone interested in legal issues and community conflicts,
Hmm.
it's going to raise some questions about like individual rights versus community standards.
For sure, for sure. So to set the scene, we're in Pine Ridge Estates, Michigan.
Okay.
So picture like perfectly manicured lawns,
Uh-huh.
those little flags letting everyone know when the lawn service is
Yeah,
coming,
right.
the whole 9 yards, right? And presiding over this picture-perfect community is our main, how do we say this, antagonist, I guess,
Yeah.
Eleanor Whitlock, the HOA president.
So the source material, a first-hand account from the judge's daughter,
Right.
describes how Mrs. Whitlock ruled Pine Ridge with an iron fist.
Oh, wow.
And I'm not even talking about enforcing reasonable rules here.
Right.
We're talking about a laundry list of like nitpicky regulations
Uh-huh.
and a pattern of harassment targeting anyone who dared to like step out of line.
So it seems like things really came to a head when the judge's parents came to visit.
Okay.
They were driving an RV,
Mm-hmm.
and well, that's where the trouble started.
Boy.
The HOA slapped them with a citation for detracting from community cohesion.
Now many states have laws limiting what HOAs can actually regulate
Right.
regarding guest visits. So this initial citation raises the question, was the HOA even within its legal rights here?
Right.
Or was this like a case of overreach from the start?
Yeah, that's a really good point, and it's just the tip of the iceberg. Yeah, from there, it was a cascade of increasingly absurd citations, like flower-shaped garden flag trash cans visible on the wrong day.
Wow.
It's almost comical if it weren't so infuriating.
Yeah, the daughter describes the emotional toll this took on the family.
Oh, I bet.
Her grandmother in tears,
Ah,
her grandfather's anger, and her father's growing frustration.
yeah.
This wasn't just about following the rules,
Wow.
It was about the HOA exerting control over every aspect of their lives.
Wow, and then things escalate even more dramatically.
Oh, no.
When the HOA takes the unprecedented step of banning the grandparents from the neighborhood entirely.
So this is where alarm bells should be going off for anyone listening.
Yeah.
HOAs do have the authority to address, legitimate concerns.
Yeah.
But banning family members without clear justification
Right.
raises serious concerns about abuse of power.
Yeah. I mean, this is huge, right?
Totally.
So the daughter, who happens to have a sharp legal mind,
Okay.
realized this had crossed a line. She knew HOAs couldn't just arbitrarily ban people.
Right.
So her father, Judge Harold Parker,
Okay.
decided to dig deeper.
This is where Judge Parker's legal expertise comes into play.
Uh-huh.
He begins investigating Mrs. Whitlock and the HOA board,
Okay.
carefully examining the community's bylaws, which are like the HOA's constitution,
Right.
and the governing documents which outline the rules residents must follow.
Got it.
And what he uncovered was shocking.
Okay, what do you find?
Mrs. Whitlock had been forging meeting minutes,
Wow.
intimidating residents into compliance,
No way.
and essentially creating a climate of fear in Pine Ridge Estates.
Wow.
This wasn't just about the Parkers anymore. It was
Right.
about a systemic pattern of abuse affecting the entire community.
That's crazy. So Judge Parker, armed with this evidence, decides to fight back.
Okay.
But instead of going after Mrs. Whitlock directly,
Yeah.
he does something incredibly clever.
What's that?
He files a restraining order, not against an individual,
Oh.
but against the entire HOA board.
Now that is
Yeah.
interesting. This was a brilliant legal maneuver.
Yeah, how so?
By classifying the HOA board's actions as a public nuisance,
Okay.
which is a term usually applied to things like excessive noise or hazardous conditions,
Right.
Judge Parker was able to leverage his authority as a county judge
Mhm.
in a way that completely caught the board off guard.
So wait, he used his position as a judge in a case that involved his family.
Right.
Wasn't that a bit ethically gray?
Well, that's a valid point.
Okay.
You know, some might argue that it blurred the lines between his personal and professional life.
Right?
But it's important to remember that Judge Parker wasn't seeking special treatment here.
Yeah.
He was using his knowledge of the law to expose and challenge what he saw as a systemic abuse of power
Right.
that was affecting not just his family, but many residents in Pine Ridge.
So how did this restraining order actually work?
Yeah.
Did it mean like the HOA couldn't do anything?
It was more strategic than that.
Okay.
The real genius of Judge Parker's move was in the next step. He petitioned to have the HOA board banned from all county facilities.
What?
Yeah, this included the community pool, the tennis courts,
Oh, wow.
and most importantly, the HOA office itself.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So they were essentially locked out of their own headquarters.
Exactly.
They're more sending out those nitpicky citations, right?
Precisely. This effectively crippled their ability to enforce their rules and gave the residents of Pine Ridge a much-needed reprieve from the constant harassment.
This whole story is like something out of a movie.
I know, right?
You can practically imagine the HOA board scrambling trying to figure out what to do next.
Totally.
But here's where it gets even better.
Okay.
Word of Judge Parker's legal battle spread and the community rallied behind him.
The courtroom on the day of the hearing was packed.
Really?
And it wasn't just a few curious onlookers.
Yeah.
It was filled with residents who had all experienced Mrs. Whitlock's overreach firsthand.
Oh, wow.
They were there to share their stories and show their support for Judge Parker.
It must have been incredibly powerful to witness that collective outpouring of frustration and solidarity.
Absolutely. It was a turning point in the narrative. For years, residents had been afraid to speak out for fear of retaliation.
Right.
But seeing Judge Parker challenge the HOA's authority empowered them to finally come forward.
Yeah.
The source material mentions a particularly poignant moment
Okay.
where Mrs. Nimwayan, a resident who had been fined for her daughter's wheelchair ramp,
Oh, wow.
directly confronted Mrs. Whitlock.
I bet that took a lot of courage.
It did, and it sparked a wave of support.
That's amazing.
Other residents shared their own stories. A veteran threatened with having his car towed for faded paint, a family fined for having a birthday party that ran a few minutes past the allowed time.
Oh, my gosh.
These weren't just rules, they were a means of control and intimidation.
It's incredible how one person's stand against injustice can inspire an entire community to rise up.
Yeah.
So what happened? Did Judge Parker win his case?
He did. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. The HOA board remained barred from county facilities, effectively stripping them of their power.
Wow.
Mrs. Whitlock's reign of terror was finally over.
Good.
Ironically, the source mentioned she ended up moving to a condo in Boca Raton, Florida,
Really?
which also had an HOA.
Oh, the irony.
Right.
But what I find most fascinating is what happened in Pine Ridge after the HOA lost its grip.
That's what makes this story so hopeful.
Yeah.
The community didn't just go back to normal, they embraced a new way of living.
Oh, wow.
Neighbors became more connected, they felt empowered to express themselves, and those legendary rule-breaking parties became symbols of their newfound freedom.
Okay, I have to hear more about these parties.
Well, imagine block parties where kids could play freely without worrying about noise complaints. Potlucks with diverse cuisines that weren't restricted by outdated rules.
Right.
And even a community garden where residents could grow whatever they pleased, even if it meant a few dandelions popping up here and there.
That's a beautiful image. Speaking of dandelions, the source mentions them specifically as a symbol of the community's defiance.
Yeah.
I love that those little yellow rebels pushing up through the perfectly manicured lawns.
It's a powerful reminder that sometimes a little bit of chaos and imperfection can be a good thing.
Yeah.
It can break down barriers and create a more authentic sense of community.
It makes you wonder if all those HOA rules were actually achieving the opposite of what they intended.
Right.
Instead of creating a sense of harmony, they were fostering resentment and isolation.
Exactly.
This whole story has really made me rethink those perfect neighborhoods we see in movies and TV shows.
Right.
It's a good reminder that there's often a lot more going on beneath the surface.
It's like the saying goes, every perfect neighborhood has its dirty laundry.
Yeah.
And sometimes that laundry involves power struggles, legal battles, and a whole lot of dandelions.
Exactly. But what I find so inspiring about the Pine Ridge story is that it shows how a community can reclaim its sense of freedom and belonging, even after being subjected to such oppressive control.
And it underscores the importance of understanding our rights and responsibilities as members of a community.
Right?
Whether we're dealing with an HOA, a local council, or any kind of governing body,
Right.
it's crucial to be aware of the rules, hold those in power accountable, and speak up when we see injustice.
For me, one of the biggest takeaways from this deep dive is the power of collective action.
Yeah.
When people come together, share their experiences, and support each other, they can create real and lasting change.
Absolutely. The residents of Pine Ridge proved that even in the face of what seemed like insurmountable obstacles,
Yeah,
they weren't powerless.
right.
Their willingness to speak out, challenge the status quo, and stand up for their rights ultimately led to a more just and equitable community.
And it all started with one judge who decided to fight back against an HOA that had gone too far.
It's a powerful reminder that even small acts of defiance can have a ripple effect, inspiring others to stand up and demand better.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Hmm.
I'm curious, what's the one thing you hope our listener takes away from this story?
I think it's this. Don't be afraid to question authority, challenge unfair rules, and advocate for the kind of community you want to live in.
Yeah.
Remember, you have a voice, and it matters.
Beautifully said. And for anyone listening who might be dealing with their own overzealous HOA or community conflicts,
Right.
remember the residents of Pine Ridge?
Mm.
They proved that positive change is possible when people come together and demand it.
And who knows, maybe you'll even be inspired to throw your own rule-breaking party.
Oh, yeah.
Just make sure to invite the neighbors.
Now that's a great idea.
Yeah.
This deep dive has been fascinating, eye-opening, and ultimately hopeful.
I agree.
Thanks for joining me on this journey.
Mm.
Till next time.